I sat on a park bench, waiting for nothing in particular. People walked by without a glance, some were on their phones, others laughing in little groups. I was invisible. I had always been. My whole life is a lie, I said to the pigeon pecking at crumbs by my feet. It didn't care. I almost laughed. It wouldn't have been the first time I talked to a pigeon. A man sat down at the other end of the bench. He looked like he had nowhere to be either. His clothes were plain, just like mine. He pulled out a small notebook and started writing. Curious, I leaned over. "What are you writing?" He didn't look up, just notes. I nodded, pretending that answer was enough. It wasn't. I was bored, and boredom always makes me nosy. "Are you a writer?" "Something like that," he said, still writing. "Fiction." He paused, tapping the pen against the page. "No, not really." I waited for him to say more. He didn't. "Do you ever feel like nobody really knows who you are?" I asked. This time, he did look up. His eyes were sharp but calm. "What do you mean?" I shrugged. "You know, like you could disappear tomorrow, and no one would notice. No one would even remember your name." He considered that. "Sounds lonely." "It is," I said, "but it's also kind of freeing. No expectations, no pressure. You can be anyone you want, or no one at all." He smiled faintly. "That's an interesting way to look at it." I crossed my arms. Not interesting, just true. We sat in silence for a while. I watched the people pass by, wondering what their lives were like. Did they feel as lost as I did, or were they really living? The man broke the silence. "Have you ever told anyone how you feel?" "No point," I said. "People only hear what they want to hear. It's easier to keep things to yourself." He nodded again, thoughtful. "You'd be surprised. Sometimes the right person listens." The man closed his notebook and stood up. "I have to go," he said. Okay, I expected that to be the end of it. Just another stranger I'd never see again. But he hesitated. "Do you want to know what I was writing?" "Sure." He handed me the notebook. "It's all about you." I frowned, flipping through the pages. My words were there, everything I'd said. But it wasn't just notes. It was a story, my story. "How did you?" "I've been watching you for a while," he said, listening. "I wanted to understand you better before I introduced myself." "Introduce yourself." He smiled. "I've been looking for someone like you for years. Someone real, someone who sees the world differently." I shook my head, confused. "Why?" "Because I'm not who I seem either," he said. "I write stories, but they're not fiction. They're people's lives, people who feel invisible. I help them see themselves more clearly, and then I tell the world who they really are." I stared at him. "Why me?" "Because you've been living in the shadows for too long," he said. "And I think the world needs to hear your story." He turned to leave but stopped. "By the way, what's your name?" I opened my mouth to answer, but for the life of me, I couldn't say it. I hadn't used it in so long, it felt like a stranger's name. "I don't know," I said quietly. The man nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Then maybe it's time to find out. And just like that, he was gone. I sat on the bench, holding the notebook. The world felt the same, but something inside me shifted. For the first time in years, I wondered who I really was. Not the person I thought I had to be, but the person I could become. Maybe it wasn't too late to figure it out.